Okay, hello. Okay, so it's week 10 of the Nourish Project. Um, Tonight we're talking about women's health and hormones and not only just like how those hormones work, but how they move and change at different stages of our cycle and then like different cycles of life that we go through as women and what to do about it, which is really the main issue, right? Like once you know it, what to do about it, how to support your body. So it's one of my favorite things to teach people about, to talk about. I find that most women don't know this stuff and it's really, really powerful. There's a couple different podcasts and one book that I highly recommend. I'll send links to them all in the notes tomorrow. The podcasts are really informative, and I got a lot of the information that I'm going to share with you guys from those podcasts. But the book is really interesting. It's called Do Less, um, a revolutionary approach to time management and energy management for ambitious women. And so if that title alone doesn't appeal to you, like, I don't know, right? So it's in this book, she talks about how to use your cycle. And if you're not cycling regularly, either because you're postmenopause or because for whatever reason, you can use the cycles of the moon to like keep track of that. And how women are just, our bodies are designed to follow this cycle rather than a 24-hour cycle, which is how men's bodies are designed, and how the whole world is set up on a 24-hour cycle. For women, we sort of ebb and flow. And it's really, really interesting. Like once you kind of become aware of that and start tracking with your energy, your moods, you can even kind of plan your schedule around like, okay, I'm going to do this big project when I know I'm going to have this big burst of energy. I'm going to plan to kind of lay low when I know I'm not going to really have the energy. It's not because you're lazy. It's just because your hormones are shifting and changing all the time. And so the premise of this book is, by planning your life sort of around when you're going to have peak energy and when you're going to have, more laid back energy, you can plan accordingly and really get a lot done by doing less. And so highly recommend this book. I'll send a link to it. It's a pretty easy read, but what's hard is actually like doing the little exercises and assignments, like a lot of books like that. Okay, let me share my slides, pull them up. Okay. Here. Okay, good. Okay, so just to start off, women are a lot more complicated than men. And so, um, we all, I'm sure, know this, but maybe like didn't really stop to think about it on a regular basis. But as women, we go through puberty, which men also go through puberty. But then through the course of our lives, there's potential for pregnancy or multiple pregnancy. And then everyone goes through perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. Meanwhile, like before that, you're going through that monthly menstrual cycle, whereas men have an increase of testosterone when they go through puberty, and then they just hold steady their whole lives until they go through andropause, which is sort of like the male equivalent of menopause, but it's much simpler, much calmer, and it's just a steady decline of testosterone. So women are a lot more complicated. And for that reason, you would think that there would be more studies on women and women's health and what we need. But in fact, it's just the opposite because it's harder and it's more complicated and everything is set up to support men, by men, for men. So the current research and most traditional recommendations as to how many calories you need, what type of exercise, nutrients, weight loss, all that stuff is all based on men, researched on men, and then heavily marketed towards women. Until the 1990s, so that is not that long ago, women were actually banned from clinical trials in the US. And then even as recently as 2004, women only made up 25% of clinical trials. Even things like pharmaceutical companies who are researching female hormone replacement drugs would do the research on men because women were too complicated, because if they were going through their either, going through their monthly cycle, their hormones are changing every day, every week, or, they may be shifting in a number of years from cycling regularly to perimenopause to postmenopause, and the internal body chemistry is different every time. So it's really complicated. And rather than embracing that and saying, okay, what can we do to support and understand women? Most of the research just said that's too complicated. We're going to study men, even to the extent of using male mice for research versus female mice. So that is not cool in my book. And so as a result, there's very little of research about and information about how women's bodies work, how to support our hormones through these different cycles, what to eat, how to exercise, etc. It's all just based on men, and in fact we're different. So what I've put together for you guys is like everything I could find that was out there, and I put it together in like this one pretty succinct talk for tonight. But like I said, I will share those podcasts, which I think are really informative and really helpful if you want to go a little bit deeper into the science and the research. So this pyramid sort of represents what we've been talking about and what we're going to be talking about. So for this we're in week 10. So the first 9 weeks of the Nourish Project, we focus really on calories. In the bottom 3 tiers of this pyramid apply to men and women equally. So calories, of course, applies to everyone. Insulin and cortisol are based on food and your movement. And then adrenal and thyroid, those are your stress hormones, apply to men and women as well. So combining food, movement, and stress. We've been talking about all those things the first 9 weeks of this program. And they apply, same to men and women, but this tippy top of the pyramid of what affects our metabolism is what we're going to talk about tonight. And so it's not like our whole entire metabolism is driven by estrogen and progesterone. It's just the smallest top of the pyramid, but it's big enough to make a pretty big impact on our health and our weight loss and fat loss goals. So this is where women differ from men, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Okay, so before we dive into that, I just want to talk about sort of like how we get here as, our ancient paleo woman ancestors and what they did to thrive and survive and evolve so that, we could be here today. And a lot of these things our body still prefers because it's what made our, ancient ancestors survive to make the future generations. So one of the things is that our ancient ancestors had very different threats than we have today. So the biggest threat was starvation and hunger. And so our body evolved that when it's stressed, when it's uncertain, when it's fear, it causes the body to release hormones that hold on to body fat, that cue hunger cravings, that say we're not full, we need more, because that threat was starvation. Now, today, there is no threat of starvation. If you live in the middle class America, there is food everywhere. Basically, everyone in America, there may be devoid of nutrients, but you're not going to starve and you're not going to lack for calories. So our body still has that same response, even though that threat is essentially non-existent. Other things about, ancient paleo women. So what did they eat? Lean protein, starches. They did not eat like just meat. They were not carnivores. They ate starches, berries, veggies, all kinds of stuff like that. But what they weren't eating was a real high fat diet, bread, nothing processed, and either no dairy or not a lot of dairy. And so those are still the kind of foods that our body favors, is protein, some starches, berries, veggies, stuff like that, and not a lot of processed food. As far as moving, We were walking all the time, most, that hunter gatherer lifestyle. So it was leisure walking. It wasn't power walking or mall walking, but just sort of moving leisurely all the time. Picture walking through the woods, foraging for berries. And then once in a while, there would be a huge expenditure of energy and a burst of energy that might be associated with like hunting, chasing an animal, carrying it back home, or like fighting or going to battle or something like that. What there was not was like slogging through steady state cardio on the elliptical, jogging, any of that kind of like middle ground. None of that. And so that is why, when I talk about ideally how we want to move, it's lots and lots of steps and joyful leisure movement, and then strength training, intense bursts of activity, but not a whole lot of it. You really don't need that much. Lots and lots of rest, and resting and sleeping with the sun. So that circadian rhythm, and our body still really loves that today. Again, it's a lot harder because of artificial light and living in the Midwest in the winter time. So it really can help to get your circadian rhythm right and get your hormones kind of just everything vibing right. One thing that really helps is going outside and just being in the sunlight as early as possible. I like to wait till the sun comes up and then go just stand on our back porch and watch the sunrise for like just a couple minutes, even in the middle of the winter. And being outside, just period, getting that fresh air and sunlight really helps with sleeping and keeping our hormones regulated. And then if you are doing things after it's dark out, which most of us are, if you can turn down your lights, put on lamps. If you're using electronics, like we all are right now, those blue blocking light glasses can really, really help with your sleep. I'm going to get a pair for sure. But if you're working, if you're watching TV, if you're reading from a Kindle, anything like that before bed, it can really help with your sleep to have those blue blocking glasses. And then lastly, our people, especially the women, lived a very communal life. And that is, again, how we evolve to thrive and to survive. And that's one of the reasons that I've switched all or most of my coaching to group programs, because I just see women come together as this group to support each other, to encourage each other, to commiserate, when it's necessary. And that's a really important part of thriving today. And it can be really, really isolating to be in today's society when everything's online and everything's on social media. Maybe you don't have to leave your house for work or groceries or anything like that. So wherever you can sort of build in that sense of community is really helpful, and just like an overall sense of well-being and happiness. Okay, any questions about that before I go on to in detail about the hormones? No? Okay, so switching gears a little bit, going specifically into what happens in our body as we go through the monthly cycle. And I know, I work with women who are perimenopause, postmenopause. And so if you're postmenopause, don't think like, oh, this totally doesn't apply to me, because this is a really good foundation for understanding what these hormones jobs are and how they work and how they interact. And then as we go through these other stages, perimenopause and postmenopause, and the levels start decreasing, it's really important to know what they were doing in the first place so that we can support the role that they were playing in our body, and understand why we're maybe acting or reacting a certain way when they're no longer there. So there's two main female sex hormones are estrogen and progesterone. And then we also have testosterone in a small amount, even though, that's largely more of a male hormone. So the women's cycle is divided into two stages. They have a couple different names. This chart calls it the follicular phase and the luteal phase. And so day one is the first day of bleeding. And then it goes into the follicular phase until ovulation, which is usually around day 14, but everybody is different. And then it goes into the luteal phase, which is the second 2 weeks of your cycle until the first day of your period. And then the cycle starts over again. So the pink line here represents estrogen, and you see it's much higher in the first half, and then it sort of declines in the second half at right in this around this ovulation, day 14. Conversely, the blue line represents progesterone. So that's real low in the first 2 weeks, and then it increases after ovulation and it's higher than estrogen. And then they both go real low back to restart the cycle. So just knowing that sort of that estrogen's high for the first 2 weeks, progesterone's high for the second 2 weeks. That's sort of the main takeaway. And that is good to know once you start understanding what they do. And this just blew my mind when I started learning about this stuff. And so I hope you guys enjoy it too. I'd be really curious, afterwards, sort of what you think about all this. But it's really helpful, I think, to think of these two hormones as like twin sisters, or maybe you could think of them as like best friends, but they're like opposites, but they work together. They need each other. They balance each other out, but they're total opposites. And estrogen is like the fun sister, the risk taker, the adventurous one. And the progesterone is the responsible, mature, risk averse sister that mom is always going to put in charge when they're home alone together, right? So estrogen gets to dominate the first 2 weeks of the cycle. And this is, she's literally more likely to get herself in trouble. Like, this job of estrogen is to get pregnant when the estrogen peak is high and like around ovulation. But she's also really resilient to stress. And she's resilient to carbs. She loves carbs and she loves stress, and she's crazy and nothing bothers her, right? So the body tends to run a little bit cooler during this first half when estrogen's dominating, because estrogen is so carb resilient. It's a good time to have higher carbs. And because she's so resilient to stress, it's a good time to do, to train harder, to do harder workouts, or to do like big projects, because she's also sort of like an egomaniac. She's like, we can do this. We got this. Like, we're going to get out here and we're going to like crush this project. Right. So whether it's like a work project or a hard workout, or, whatever it is, like the big, exciting, ambitious thing, or even if it's just getting out and meeting people, networking with people, important meetings, this is the sister that you want to bring to those meetings, because she is like a magnetic personality. Her job is to meet people, have them love her, and be the like fun, attractive, magnetic sister. So it's also a time when you may feel higher self-confidence, higher self-esteem, more drive, more ambition. But then once we get to ovulation, she goes to sleep and the progesterone sister takes over. And this is the responsible, mature sister that mom puts in charge. The reason is because at ovulation is when the body could potentially get pregnant. So the fun sister gets knocked up, and now the mature sister has to take care of the pregnancy. Basically what happens. So all of a sudden your body's warmer because you're nesting. She wants to be safe. She wants to be responsible. She doesn't want to get hurt. She doesn't want to take on too much because she's conserving energy. She's going to be not that resilient to stress, because she doesn't want to take on big projects or a lot of work or really anything, because everything she's doing is conserving energy to nurture this potentially viable pregnancy. Same thing with carbs. She does not want to let go or burn those carbs. She wants to store every bit of energy as body fat, because she does not care how you look in a bikini. She wants to make sure that baby has enough fuel in case, we go back to the caveman days and we don't get any food for a month or something. So she is safeguarding everything. So during this part of the cycle, you may feel like not that ambitious. You may feel kind of like nesting. You may feel like planning. This is a really good time to do like planning and organizing type of work or projects versus like being out and being like the face of the organization and meeting people and doing stuff like that. Um, what else about it? Yeah, so also progesterone is also resilient to stress. So both estrogen and progesterone really good at dealing with stress. Only the estrogen good at dealing with carbs. So those are two important things to remember as we go on to talk about perimenopause and postmenopause. Then one other thing to mention is also during the cycle, testosterone pokes his little head up. Testosterone is like these two sisters. If they're two sisters, this is like their little brother. And testosterone peaks right at ovulation. And if you think of all the like classic stereotypical testosterone things, think of like men in the weight room and big and confident and brash, and like that is what testosterone does. It feels strong, it feels powerful, and increase the libido so that our body will want to get pregnant. And then as soon as ovulation is done, it goes away until like a month later. Okay, any questions about that before I go forward? Okay, so I want to talk just a little bit more. I mentioned some of these things, but knowing during these two parts of the cycle, and I also want to say, if you are not cycling regularly for any reason, if you're postmenopause or you just don't get your period, sometimes people are on an IUD or low body fat, maybe you're not getting your period, you can always track this with the moon. And before we were all subject to a ton of artificial light, and when we were living more communally, all women cycled with the moon, with the new moon being the first day of a period and the full moon being ovulation, which totally makes sense that during the full moon, like everyone would be going crazy. That's how everyone used to be. So if you want to pay attention to this and start tracking it, but you're not getting your cycle, you can do it along with the cycles of the moon. And that is Kate Northrup talks a lot about that in her book, and how your energy corresponds with the moon phases as well as your internal hormones. So, okay, what to do about it now that we kind of know that? So during the follicular phase, when estrogen's high, that's the first 2 weeks from the first day of your period to day 14 or ovulation. It's a good time to eat higher carbs, higher calories, because that estrogen loves carbs. It's a good time to do heavy, hard workouts because she's ambitious and she is resilient to stress. So this is a good time to like go for PRs when you're strength training, do more HIIT or Metcon type of workouts, or just go harder, go heavier overall. So I wouldn't recommend totally changing your workouts, like, oh, you can only strength train these 2 weeks, but then you have to stretch and do yoga these other two. No, it's more just like, these are the times to go harder and go heavier. And then during those other 2 weeks could be like a deload week or more of a restful period, or go lighter. As for temperature, you're going to be cool those first 2 weeks. So you can support it by just sort of like lowering the temperature. And you can also eat like cooling foods. I think she talks about it a little bit in this, but if you are interested in really getting like aligning your diet to support your cycle, I have another book that I can recommend that to me is really next level. Most of my clients are just working on like getting their macros. But there is like certain cooling food you can eat during this period, like fish, dill kind of sauces, dill, basil, sort of cooling herbs and stuff like that. And then during the progesterone phase, when you're kind of nesting and your body is warmer and you're craving heat and comfort, it's a good time to have more like spices and curry and beef and sort of warming foods, like those type of things. As far as planning the perfect date night, sometimes this can be really helpful. And like, maybe you've had an experience where you like plan to have like a romantic getaway and then you just don't feel like it. And it could be because of where you are in your cycle. And so if you sort of know and you can plan on it, those first 2 weeks, especially around ovulation, is like definitely a time to go go for it, have that sexy time. The second 2 weeks, especially as you're approaching the beginning of your period or the first day of your cycle, might just be more like snuggles, other types of intimacy that are just more like cozy and calming, might feel really good. And then where I think this gets really exciting, and what, like I said, what Kate Northrup talks about in her book Do Less, is if you can plan this and you start tracking it, this is when you can tackle these big projects, ambitious projects, outward facing projects in work and in life. And the second 2 weeks is when you could do more of like planning or just take a break. And that would be a great time to do it when you sort of don't feel that ambitious, versus trying to force it when your hormones are like not really in alignment for the projects and the work that you have planned. And I know no one really has like 100% control over your schedule, but if you start paying attention to it and thinking about it, moving on, perimenopause. No one likes to talk about this. So this is time period in the late 30s to anywhere in the late 50s. It starts differently for all women. Where we start to go through irregular periods. And what's actually happening is that the follicle that holds onto the egg is less viable, or there's fewer of them. So essentially, we're not ovulating as much as we were earlier. And since there's no ovulation, there's no corpus luteum, which is what triggers the progesterone. So we're not getting that trigger for the progesterone to increase those second 2 weeks. And when I said that it's going to matter what those two hormones are doing, this is where it's really important. So progesterone, remember, that is the mature, responsible sister who balances out the crazy estrogen sister. So now estrogen's out there just playing by herself. She's not affected, but the progesterone is decreasing. And so what does that mean? Progesterone's the crazy sister. She's got cravings. She wants carbs. She wants to do like reckless stuff. So there might be like mood fluctuations. There might be carb cravings, maybe putting on weight because of the carb cravings. Also, it's really important to know, that's what's happening. It's because estrogen is just like going up and down without her balancing, moderating effect of the progesterone. So then what to do about it is to replace the role that progesterone played. And this is where I talk to a lot of women in their late 30s, 40s, even early 50s, who are telling me they're doing these traditional responses. They don't know why suddenly they're putting on weight. What they used to do doesn't work anymore. And they're trying harder. They're just doing the willpower method. They're like cutting more calories, going lower and lower, and just trying, kind of like blaming themselves when that doesn't work. And they go crazy with exercise, like Orange Theory, Sculpt, yoga, Peloton, all these like high intensity cardio stuff. And that is unfortunately the exact opposite of what our bodies need, because what we really need to do is replace the effect of the progesterone. We need to be that moderating, calming effect that progesterone played, and it's now not there anymore. So we need to focus on rest, relaxation, not high intensity cardio, but shifting more and more towards walking, leisure movement, that daily joyful movement, rather than doing the high intensity, stressful cardio. And just really sort of step in and replace be the mother and replace the role that progesterone played in the body. So the good news is it's an invitation to take self-care to the extreme and have an excuse to say, you know what, I have to get a massage. I have to take a nap. I have to, do this thing. Self-care is much different, much like more different in your late 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, all the way past past that, whenever you start perimenopause 30s, it is not cut calories and exercise more. It is things like getting outside, being in that green settings, getting that nature therapy, socializing with good friends that just releases all kinds of good hormones to our body, time with pets. We already talked about how that boosted your immune system. I love that. Time with loved ones, sexy time and snuggling. And I've had clients who said, I'm not dating anyone. I don't have a pet. Get a weighted blanket. Those things are amazing. So weighted blanket, like anything that just makes you feel comfy and cozy and safe and snuggled, it's really good. Like weighted blanket, lots and lots and lots of leisure walking. This should become the dominant form of exercise, starting around perimenopause, with like sporadic, intense bursts of exercise, but not too much. Naps, lots of naps. Sleep is more important than ever. Saunas, contrast therapy is where you do like hot and cold. So like a sauna and then like a cold plunge pool, or a steam room and then cold plunge pool. Like I said, massage, going to the spa, that kind of stereotypical self-care stuff. And then there's some things that people, don't necessarily think of when they think of self-care. But one thing that is really important and a really good buffer against stress is finding that deep purpose and meaning in your life. And a lot of times people are going through perimenopause at the same time that they hit retirement. And all of a sudden they're just sitting there in their chair golfing, and they are, don't have that purpose anymore. And so finding that purpose, that something beyond yourself that you live for, some kind of personal mission, it is really a good, deep buffer against stress. I should probably have that at the end of this list, because I'm like, oh, so reading a great book is a great stress reliever. But really any kind of awe experience. So any like, oh, this feels so good. Such, like a massage, a pedicure, a nap, or something awe-inspiring, being out in nature, seeing beautiful places, having great conversations. All those kind of things are going to do the same sort of stress relief or stress moderating effect that the progesterone was playing, but is decreasing. Okay. Any questions about that before we go on to the next stage? Okay. So next stage after perimenopause comes menopause. So technically menopause is after a period of 12 months with no menstruation. So post-menopause is kind of, it's sort of a misnomer, because menopause is after you've had 12 straight months with no menstruation. The whole time before that, if there's like up and downs, then it's perimenopause. And if you want a really funny commentary about perimenopause moving into menopause, the new Sex and the City had a whole episode where Charlotte thought she was finally not getting her period, and her 13-year-old daughter was first getting her period, and then she got her period while she was wearing like a white outfit out in the middle of like a volunteer opportunity. So that like totally cracked me up. So if you want a little bit of humor about going through menopause, what was it called? And Just Like That, the new Sex and the City, was hilarious. Wait, let me check the chat. Oh, Lisa said that was my favorite episode. It was so funny. Yeah, I loved it. Okay, so what happens in menopause? So in menopause, the progesterone has already decreased. There's 12 months with no menstruation. Remember, the menstruation is what triggers estrogen to take off. So the estrogen is decreasing or gone. Progesterone is already gone. So those two hormones that were both stress resilient are gone. And not only that, but the carb loving effect of the estrogen is gone. Testosterone decreases a little bit as well, but it was never like a huge player in, so it doesn't really, doesn't really have that much of an effect post-menopause. So one thing that we see when women are post-menopause, especially if they're not really, supporting their hormones correctly, is that weight shifts to the belly, and they get sort of from an hourglass. Are you raising your hand? Yeah, it is very common. That shift from an hourglass figure to apple, even if, their weight isn't maybe necessarily changing, but it's shifting. And the interesting thing about that is that's the same place you see fat accumulation with younger women who are very high stressed. And it's because of that hormone shift of not like supporting the hormones and managing and decreasing the stress. So that is one thing to do about it, is to keep really focusing on stress management and replacing the role of progesterone in your body, because that is what both estrogen and progesterone were doing, and now they're gone. And so you can, see it with younger women who are highly stressed, or with older women who have gone through menopause. The second thing to support your body after menopause is insulin management, which just means eating the right amount and right kind of carbs. So this is kind of like Goldilocks carb situation. And of course, like everything else that affects our bodies is different for everyone. You have to kind of play around and listen to your body to find out what is best for you. But a body is less able to handle extremes, less able to handle fluctuations. So it can't be too little, it can't be too much. And it's really helpful to shift to more complex carbs. Last week we talked about the GI index. So lower GI index carbs tend to have higher fiber, lower sugar, and your body's going to have more of that steady blood sugar levels by having more complex carbs and less sugar. And I'm sorry to say, but there's really like no workaround for it. But just knowing that your body, that's what your body needs, is those complex carbs, those slow burning, high fiber carbs, is going to respond much better than it will to sugar. And when we're younger, we can handle, more sugar and bounce back from a weekend or a week or, a crazy whatever. But, as we, shift into the next cycle and next cycle of life, our body's just not able to really like bounce back. And we have to just be like steady with the lower sugar, higher fiber carbs. The third thing that's really going to help is protein management. I know I've been preaching protein. Hopefully I sound like a broken record to you guys about protein by now. But postmenopausal women actually need the most protein of any demographic group after adolescent boys. So like really need the protein. It is going to help keep muscle. It's going to help moderate the blood sugar level. And by keeping the muscle on, it's going to keep your metabolism high and keep burning the body fat, which is what we want it to do. And then the last thing is strength training. So it sounds kind of weird that I'm like, okay, postmenopausal women, you need more protein and you need strength training, right? But it's really true. And the other thing that the strength training can help with is you're having those cravings, which can be kind of relentless. Like Phoebe, you were talking about like the sugar, right? Like they can be relentless. So if you're having, the sugar, the carbs, and your strength training, at least your body can turn them into muscle, right? So it can do something good with that calorie surplus. Strength training with a calorie surplus is going to help your body use those calories to build muscle and not store it as body fat, which is really what we want. Okay, just a little bit more about sort of the science behind healthy aging. And this stuff, sort of the healthy aging, applies to both men and women, but I think this is a nice time to talk about it since we just talked about going through menopause. But there's a process called sarcopenia, which means it's that our body naturally starts to decline, the muscle mass starts to decline 3 to 8% per decade after age 30. And although that happens to everyone, it doesn't have to happen. If you're intentional about eating protein, if you're intentional about strength training, you can build that muscle, keep that muscle, and then your metabolism is not going to slow down, or not slow down nearly as much. Most people think like, oh, I'm getting old, so my metabolism is slowing down. That is not what happens. We start to lose muscle because we're not intentionally keeping it on. We're not strength training, eating enough, eating protein. And so we start to lose muscle. And as you guys know by now, the muscle on your body frame is what keeps your metabolism up and is that fat burner for our body. So one of the best things you can do for healthy aging and to keep your healthy weight as you age is build muscle, build it now, and keep building it, keep strength training, keep eating the protein. Stress, we talked about a lot. And, as we age, there's like sort of a like U curve of like stress that is just the highest in that like middle age period after you retire, after you're, have, just sitting, enjoying your life and the fruits of your labor, the stress probably goes way down. But as you're working, taking care of family, taking care of pets, being active in the community, there is so much stress. So that contributes to anxiety, poor sleep, weight gain. And so doing whatever you can to manage and decrease the stress will really help with not only staying healthy as you age, but also keeping that healthy weight that you want and not contributing to weight gain. And then hormones is what we just talked about tonight. So hormone fluctuations, taking care of those and really paying attention to what your body's telling you. If it tells you it needs rest, take a nap. Don't give it caffeine. If it's telling you it needs food, give it some nourishing, macro balanced food rather than the sweets or the sugar that it might be craving. So again, this is sort of a repeat, but what to do about healthy aging, embrace the aging process. Like no one's figured out how to slow down aging or stop time yet. So we just have to embrace it and roll with it, but really work with your hormones, not against them. Be as consistent as possible. Like I was mentioning earlier, that weekend bounce back is just not happening anymore. Even I see it, and I saw it when I was in my 30s. Now that I'm 40, I see it even more. So just staying as consistent as possible with your bedtime, your wake up time, what you're eating, what you're feeding your body from weekdays to weekends is really going to help it feel nourished and be happy. Put on as much muscle as you can. I just talked about that. And then really, really, really focus on recovery, stress management, and nutrition. So much equally or more important than working out really hard, which is, what most people focus on in their 20s and 30s, because that's really that's enough to get by when you're in your 20s and your 30s, but it's not anymore. Okay, Lisa says, I have to jump off to fulfill family dinner. No problem. That was the end of everything I have for you guys. I'm happy to stay on for questions, but I know BB, you also have a meeting usually at 7:30, right? Okay. Well, if you guys think of any questions, or if you're watching the replay, you have questions, I am always happy to talk about this stuff. So just reach out to me and we can chat. Yeah, that's all I have. Thank you. Have a great night. Bye.